live for any new staff coming on board, or if you want to review it later, or staff who are off this week. Yes, Angie, I will be sending out the slides. And I'll go over that in a minute. There's a lot of people jumping on right now. Please. Just ask if everyone can mute themselves for now. That'd be really appreciated. So good morning, everyone. I'm Kirsty Schott. I'm the Continuum of Care Program Administrator for the Bureau of Housing Supports for the Balance of State Continuum of Care. I am going to get started. I do have Betsy O'Connor here from the Bureau of Housing team to kind of help assist me with chat boxes and everything else. We are working on the Continuum of Care 102 training. I would ask that everyone please put your name and agency that you're representing in the chat box. We are taking attendance for this presentation. I am recording this presentation so that as you have new staff onboarding, staff who are unable to attend today, or if you need to go back and review any of the slides, I will be able to share A, the recording, and B, the slides with all of your agencies after this training this morning. I am going to begin the presentation, and I am going to stop my video share because I make funny faces when I present, so I don't want you all distracted. Betsy, if there's any chat questions, if you can flag me down, that would be great.
No problem.
Thanks, Betsy. All right.
Can you put your name in?
And the only last thing I would ask if you can mute yourself unless you have a question, and Betsy will let me know if anyone has any specific questions. So we are going to begin the Continuum of Care 102 training. The Continuum of Care 101 training went over specifically what a continuum of care is, what the roles and responsibilities of a continuum of care are, and went through the Bureau of Housing Support's responsibilities as a continuum of care and some of the eligible and approved costs for continuum of care projects. This training is really going to focus on participant eligibility and steps that need to be taken for admission into
You want some tea?
continuum of care programs. I'm just going to go in and mute. Okay. So as most of you know, New Hampshire Balance of State Continuum of Care, the Bureau of Housing Supports is the recipient of the Continuum of Care program funds for all of the projects within the Balance of State Continuum of Care, and we contract with HUD for these resources. Bureau of Housing supports works with subrecipient agencies who administer all of the continuum of care programs. And as the recipient of the funds, the Bureau of Housing supports is responsible to HUD to meet all of the requirements of the COC interim rule and the related federal mandates. I'm going to briefly go over the goals and the objectives. Sorry, there's a mistake in my slide of the Continuum of Care program. The Continuum of Care program is designed to link permanent housing opportunities for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. Currently, the Balanced Estate Continuum of Care has permanent supportive housing projects, rapid rehousing projects, supportive services only projects, which are mainly for coordinated entry, and homelessness management information system projects, which are in partnerships with all of the subrecipient agencies. I'm going to review what a permanent supportive housing project is and what a rapid rehousing project is, because those are our main projects within the New Hampshire Balanced Estate Continuum of Care. A permanent supportive housing project provides permanent supportive housing and services for those with disabilities who are experiencing homelessness and may be experiencing severe mental illness, substance abuse issues, or other chronic problems such as a disability, medical illness, things along those lines. The goal of the permanent supportive housing program is to provide housing and services to the most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness who also have a disabling condition. We work on integrating people into their communities, assist them with securing or increasing their skills, income, and employment, providing linkages or support with supportive services, and enhancing the household's ability to maintain their own self-sufficiency if possible. The goals of the Rapid Rehousing Project are to provide permanent and supportive service assistance for people experiencing homelessness and or chronic homelessness. These participants can be individuals, youth, or families. They are not required to have a disability unless it is stipulated in the project grant agreement and contract with HUD. Again, the Rapid Rehousing Project works with people to provide linkages to appropriate supportive services, the ability to reach self-sufficiency, increase skills, income, and employment resources, and to provide that short or medium-term housing stabilization supports. Today, we will go over a lot of record keeping, specifically in regards to participant files. All subrecipient agencies must follow the must follow all the record keeping requirements in the Balanced Estate COC Policies and Procedures Manual and must ensure adherence to all of the HUD requirements. I just want to note that no documents for participant files can be replaced as interim or annual processes are completed, nor may they be destroyed. All participant files must be kept for the greater of 5 years after a participant exits or terminates from a project.
Christy, do you have a different slide at this point?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not good at this. I think you guys know that. Hold on. There we go. Thank you, Ellen. I will try to keep up. I need two of me sometimes. So just as a reminder, we must keep COC participant files with all of the documentation for the greater of 5 years after they have been either exited from the program or they have been terminated from the program. These files can still be reviewed by both the Bureau of Housing Supports and by HUD. So today we are going to review the steps that are completed on behalf of a COC program participant that must be documented in a participant's file, including eligibility, record keeping requirements, and verifications. All of these steps are again laid out in the Balance of State Bureau of Housing Support's Continuum of Care Policies and Procedural Manual. We'll be reviewing application and rent-up process, determination of eligibility, housing search processes, execution of lease or occupancy agreements, rental calculations, and ongoing operations. There are a couple of exercises that we will be going through, and there's also a break that I have built into this PowerPoint. He will let all of you know I was a little ambitious with this training. So if we don't get through all of it today, I will schedule a second session, and I apologize for being very ambitious. But I do talk very fast sometimes, so hopefully we can get through most of it. So we're going to start with step one. Step one involves for program participants that initial referral to your COC project from the coordinated entry system, the application process, and then the rent-up process. I know that all of you mostly know that all COC subrecipient agencies receive your referrals for your COC projects from the Balance of State Continuum of Care coordinated entry system. Subrecipient agencies are required to complete an application with any participants based on that referral. You verify your eligibility requirements, which we're going to go through today, and you approve or deny the application based on the information that you received. I would recommend to everyone to please review the Balance of State Policy and Procedural Manual and the Coordinated Entry Manual for further information on denials of any coordinated entry referrals. Sorry, my screen stopped sharing. Hold on. There we go. In regards to rental assistance projects, once you receive a referral from a coordinated entry project, if you are a Continuum of Care rental assistance project, if your household is approved for a rental assistance project, the subrecipient agency advises that household that they have 60 days to initiate that subsidy and move into a unit. All case managers at subrecipient agencies should be offering assistance and support with housing searches in order for those households to move into an apartment within 60 days. I know that I say 60 days, and this is currently in the manual. And I know the lack of affordable housing issue that is happening within New Hampshire right now, but I will get to where there are possible extensions available for housing searches. Leasing projects, if you are a Continuum of Care leasing projects, if a subrecipient agency is currently leasing a vacant unit, you are able to show the participant one or more of these vacant units. So if you have 2 units available, you're to show them both units. And the participant has 7 days from the time they view a unit to accept the unit or not. And then subsequently, if you do not have vacant units that you're able to show a household and you need to identify new units to lease, you'll work with that participant and get them housed hopefully within 60 days. I had briefly mentioned earlier housing search extensions. Do we have a question?
Christy, I have a quick question to Angie.
Sure.
On the part with the client views a vacant unit and that they have 7 days to decide, what if you show several units to one participant who is vouchered up through the PSH project and they keep denying units that you show them?
So Angie, your projects are tenant-based rental assistance, so
Yeah.
it's different.
Okay.
That is only for leasing projects. Leasing projects sometimes already have a lease with a landlord or have a unit that's available and they're able to move someone into that unit because the lease is still standing.
Okay, gotcha.
With your tenant-based rental assistance, you have up to 60 days to initiate that subsidy. And most of the COC projects out there, there's very, very few of you who have leasing dollars, and it's mainly families in transition who have the leasing dollars.
Okay.
And I'm going to go over, you can ask for extensions with it, which I know some of you know this. If you're not able to initiate that subsidy for tenant-based rental assistance or even leasing projects within 60 days, you're allowed to authorize another 30 to 60 days for up to 120 days to initiate that subsidy. What needs to happen is that you need to send a request to myself in regards to the request for that housing search. You need to note the extenuating circumstances around why they cannot find a unit. I know that Angie just mentioned they keep turning down units. The unit might not be accessible for them in regards to their disabilities, or it doesn't meet the requirements for their family, or things along those lines. I know the huge one right now is that there is a very severe lack of affordable housing. So if your agencies are unable to initiate a housing subsidy within 60 days, one of your reasons can be the lack of affordable housing and that you're not able to find units. I know that many of you have reached out to me stating they've looked at 6 units, or we've called 6 places and we can't even get a showing to see the unit. So that is a valid reason right now in this extremely competitive market to extend the subsidy search for another 60 days past the initial.
Chrissy, is this something new?
No, this is not something new.
Okay.
This has been in place for all the COC projects since the COC manual went into place, I believe, in either 2019 or 2020. All right. So the only other thing we need to discuss briefly is operating projects. We do have, I want to say, about 6 projects that receive operating funds within the balance of state. These projects own buildings, so they have units available for rent once they turn over. Again, it's very similar to leasing. You are to show that apartment that is available to the participant once you receive a referral. And the program participant is given 7 days to agree to that unit. Again, it's focusing on client choice and whether or not they want to take that unit. If they refuse the unit, they are still able to maintain their status on the prioritization list, and are available for further continuum of care coordinated entry referrals. Next, we are going to review step 2, which is participant eligibility. We're going to review all of the homeless definitions that apply to the continuum of care program. It's really important to understand for each of your COC projects who is eligible under your project application, and who is eligible for your program. If you have questions about your program eligibility and program participants, you can reach out to me directly. So we're going to begin with determination of eligibility. All COC funded projects must serve eligible participants per HUD requirements and your approved HUD project application. All the subrecipient agencies are responsible to determine eligibility for your projects and maintain that documentation. For all permanent supportive housing projects, this includes homelessness and disability. So all subrecipient agencies, once you receive that coordinated entry referral, you conduct the initial certification with the participant, which is retained in the participant's file and includes their eligibility verification, So it's either homelessness verification for everyone and also includes disability verification for permanent supportive housing and meets all of the documentation standards in place. So we're going to go over those documentation standards per HUD's requirements for homelessness verification. You should also be including any releases of information. You can use an agency release form as necessary. And it should also be including your New Hampshire HMAS client acknowledgement form and the release of information form as applicable for each of your individuals in the household. Next, I'm going to review the homelessness definitions for eligibility into programs. So currently, there are 3 different definitions. We have the homelessness HUD definition, there's a chronic homelessness HUD definition, and the dedicated plus project definition, which we will be reviewing, which determines your eligibility for each of your projects. First, I'm going to review the homelessness definition per HUD. In December of 2011, HUD defined the final definition of homelessness, which was published in the Federal Register. It defined the 4 categories of homelessness that you see above, and we are going to go through each one of those categories. Category 1 is literally homeless. According to HUD, this is any individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, has a primary nighttime residence that is a public or private place not meant for human habitation, is living in a publicly or privately operated shelter designed to provide temporary living arrangements, which includes congregate shelters, transitional housing, hotels, and motels, paid for by charitable organizations or by federal, state, and local governments, or is exiting an institution where he or she or they has resided for more than 90 days or less, and who has resided in an emergency shelter or place not meant for human habitation immediately before entering the institution. Category 2 is those at eminent risk of experiencing homelessness, those who will lose their primary nighttime residence. This portion of the definition was not new to HUD in 2011. It operationalized the portion of the definition as the 7-day rule and allowed persons who would lose their housing within 7 days to be eligible for transitional housing and supportive services only projects. The Hart Amendment Acts operationalized this into from the 7-day rule to the 14-day rule. So there was a change so that people who are going to lose their residence within 14 days were at eminent risk of experiencing homelessness. So they need to have no other subsequent residents identified and a lack of resources or support networks to obtain other permanent housing. Individuals or families who meet this definition can be served by projects that were awarded in FY 2020 Continuum of Care project competition. Currently, there are no projects within the balance of state that are allowed to serve Category 2 under the Continuum of Care projects. Category 3 is any unaccompanied youth under 25 years of age or families with Category 3 children and youth who do not otherwise qualify as homeless under this definition, but who are defined as homeless under other listed federal statutes, have not had a lease, ownership, interest, or occupancy agreement in permanent housing during the 60 days prior to the homeless assistance application, or have experienced persistent instability as measured by 2 moves or more during the preceding 60 days, and can be expected to continue in such status for an extended period of time due to special needs or barriers. And lastly, we have category 4, which is this portion of the definition was not new to HUD. However, the HART Act amendment in 2012 codified this category into the definition of homelessness. It's any individual, youth, or family who is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, has no other identified subsequent residence, and lacks the resources or support networks to obtain other permanent housing. We do currently have one project specific to category 4, but can also serve category 1 as well within the Balanced Estate Continuum of Care. So currently, this chart demonstrates homelessness eligibility. Please note that not all the costs that are available that we discussed in the Continuum of Care 101 training are available under every program component. So as you can see, permanent housing, permanent supportive housing can serve literally homelessness category 1. They can serve permanent housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and supportive services only projects. All of our supportive services only projects can serve category 3 and category 2. And then all of our projects, we don't have any transitional, but all of our projects can serve category 4 as well. I think this is very important to note that both permanent supportive and rapid rehousing projects can serve category 4 individuals, youth, and family who meet that definition. Next, I'm going to review the chronically homelessness definition. According to HUD, the chronic homelessness definition means an individual who is experiencing homelessness with a disability who has lived in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven, or an emergency shelter, and has been homeless continuously for at least 12 months, or at least 4 separate occasions in the last 3 years, where the combined occasions must total at least 12 months. Any of these occasions separated by a break of at least 7 nights do not constitute a break, and stays in an institution of fewer than 90 days do not constitute a break. Number 2, any individual who has been residing in an institutional care facility for fewer than 90 days and met all of the criteria in paragraph 1 before entering that facility. So anyone who is experiencing homelessness as defined in number 1, so if they were living on the streets in an emergency shelter prior to entering an institution for less than 90 days, may meet the chronic homelessness definition. And then finally, any family with an adult head of household who meets the criteria in paragraph 1 or 2, including a family whose composition has fluctuated while the head of household has been homeless. So this slide, and I will send it out, I'm not going to go through it in detail. This is HUD's flow chart of HUD's definition of chronic homelessness. So if you are working with a participant who you're wondering about their eligibility and determining their chronic homelessness status, you can use this flow chart to determine whether or not they meet the definition of chronic homelessness. I will send this out to everyone in the slides, and I can also send it out as a separate PDF, and it is available on HUD's website as well. There's a notation of where you can find it. This is HUD's documentation standards for chronic homelessness. The Balanced Estate has developed its own chronic homelessness documentation form that is required by all COC subrecipient agencies that are documenting chronic homelessness status. And it requires that you include the disability verification that is attached to the form. And I'm going to go over that form shortly. But this is kind of a brief documentation standards from HUD about chronic homelessness. Many of the COC projects are either 100% dedicated to serving chronically homelessness, or they have a certain number of beds that are dedicated to serving the chronic homelessness. These projects must meet the record keeping standard for those beds and ensure they're serving people who are experiencing homelessness. And while I say this, I know that all of you receive your referrals for any of your beds or units that are available from the coordinating entry system. If you're not able to receive a chronically homelessness referral from the Balanced State coordinating entry system, the Bureau of Housing Supports will work with you to document this thoroughly before you accept a non-chronic homeless household into your project. In regards to record keeping for dedicated chronic homelessness and project beds, we're going to look at the Bureau of Housing Support's chronic homelessness documentation checklist in just a minute, but we have to make sure we're documenting a continuous homelessness episode for time spent in places not meant for human habitation or in emergency shelters that documents 12 months or 4 episodes within the last 3 years. And just for reference, there is new guidance from HUD on chronic homelessness documentation. A break is considered 7 or more consecutive nights where a household is not experiencing homelessness. For the 1-year continuous of documenting homelessness, it's generally at least 9 months must be documented from a third-party source. And for 4 occasions in 3 years, at least 3 occasions must be documented from a third-party source. And I am going to, hold on 1 second, switch my screen. So I'm going to share my screen with the New Hampshire Bureau of Housing Support's Continuum of Care Chronic Homelessness Documentation Checklist. This checklist needs to be completed by any project who is either fully dedicated to serving those experiencing chronic homelessness or those who have dedicated a portion of their beds in their project application to serving the chronic homelessness. So this form needs to be completed by those projects. And it includes, this form was formed after HUD's form that was put out a couple of years ago. It includes information about the client name, the number in the household, the date of birth, their current housing status, any current housing status notes. And then part 2 is one of the important parts that needs to be filled out. This is housing history. So this form is completed either for the 1 year of continuous experiencing homelessness or for the 4 episodes in the last 3 years. What you're going to do is put in, where it says month year, you're going to put in the month that they were experiencing homelessness. So for month 1, if they were in an emergency shelter, you would put January of 2021. And then you would check off shelter if they were in an emergency shelter. And this documentation type can be either, if they're an emergency shelter, it can be from HMIS. You can also obtain a letter from the staff at the emergency shelter saying this person was at our emergency shelter from X date to X date. So whether they were in there from August of 2021 until January of 2022, you can have that documentation from the emergency shelter or directly from HMIS. So for each of the months, you are going to put in the month, where that person was residing, your documentation type, whether you're getting information from HMIS, you have a letter documenting their observation of experiencing homelessness from an outreach worker. If you have information from a comparable database about this household experiencing homelessness, if you have discharge paperwork from an institution or facility or from prison or jail stating their experience with homelessness prior to entering the facility and after exiting the facility, or if you're documenting their homelessness through self-certification. Which can be done. Yep.
Hi, sorry. There's a few people that are saying that they cannot see your screen.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure. Some
Hold on.
can, some can't.
Oh, no. Hold on. Let's see here. Let me see if I can fix this. Some can, some can't. Let's try again. How about now?
Yeah, I'm not getting any reports saying that they can't. So I think we're good to go.
Okay, good. I'm glad you can all see it. And you can see me. So I'm going to continue on. Oh.
Amanda says she can only see you and not your document.
Sorry, I can actually only see like a circle that says KS in the circle.
Okay.
All right. Technical difficulties are fun.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me try one more time. I will send this out to everyone. Can you see it now? Samantha?
No, I'm sorry. I can try to exit and come back in if it's just me.
Yeah, that's probably going to fix that.
Okay.
You might
Thank
only-
you, Amanda. Thank you.
You might only have it on speaker view for yourself, so you might want to check that.
Thank you. I'm just going to pause for a second so we can see if she can see it. Thank you, Ellen, for your response, and Lindsay.
Christy, it's Angie. I just have a quick question on this. I think I've asked you before, but I don't remember. But for the location, for those who are, say, staying in a hotel or motel being paid by another entity, or those who are staying in a campground being paid by another entity, what box are we going to check off for that?
You can put in a handwritten note because there is no box.
Yeah.
Just put in a handwritten note in that location area, or just put in see attached documentation for that month.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, this form was developed off of HUD, so I will see if we can update that. That's a really good point, Angie. Thank you. Just gonna take one note and then we'll start up again. So this form also gives you the option to document those breaks in homelessness if anyone is experiencing any. So again, it's more than 7 nights that someone is experiencing a break in homelessness. So down here at the bottom right here, you can describe their break in homelessness if there is one. And then you can add notes as well. The next page has any self-certification of experiencing homelessness. So if you do check yes, participants are able to self-certify experiencing homelessness for up to 3 months. And only 75% of your households in your project. So if you have 10 projects in your COC project, only 8 of them can self-certify the 3 months of experiencing homelessness. So it's a weird math. So if you have questions about that, please let me know.
So
Christy,
Yep.
I thought that, I could be wrong, but I thought that anyone could certify up to 3 months, but it was if you were gonna self-certify the whole thing, could only have 25% of people. Am I just wrong on that?
It depends on your project. So it's only up to 75% of your households can self-certify 3 months.
Okay,
For chronically homeless, it's different for dedicated plus projects, Ellen, and we can get into the nitty gritty of that at a different conversation.
all right.
Okay. All right. The next part of the chronically homelessness documentation form is disability status. This part of the form is filled out by your subrecipient case managers. It needs to be accompanied by actual written verification from a licensed professional or written verification from Social Security Administration or a receipt of a disability check. So it cannot be just checked off by Angie. I'm going to pick on you, Angie at CLM. She can check these boxes off, but there needs to be a piece of paper attached confirming that they have an actual disability.
Christy, would their Social Security award letter count for that written from Social Security or an actual letter from them?
So yes and no. I'm going to get into disability verification later on in this training. I think many of you know that oftentimes you receive a Social Security award letter, and it does not specify if that individual is receiving SSI or SSDI. It has to be very specific in the award letter from Social Security to ensure that it says SSDI.
Okay.
The final part.
Christy, SSI award letter, hi, it's Lauren from FIT, is not suffice?
No, it does not suffice for verification of disability.
Okay.
It is suffice for verification of income, which we'll also talk about, but it does not verify disability completely.
And we're doing this form prior to move-in or prior to, I'm just a little confused. When are we doing this form at move-in?
Technically, this form is done prior to move-in in regards to eligibility for people coming into any 100% dedicated chronically homeless projects, or if you're filling a dedicated chronically homeless bed / household. I would encourage every project, if you can, obtain chronic homelessness verifications to do so, because in the last several years, your projects have been scored on how many chronic homeless households you are serving within your projects. And the reason this question is on the scoring tool is because HUD has identified a priority to end chronic homelessness, along with ending veteran homelessness and youth homelessness. So if you can document this, you should. Not all of you have to, but I would recommend, if you can and you know someone is experiencing chronic homelessness, to complete this form and make sure you're documenting it in HMIS. So the final page of this is staff and client certifications. The client and the staff both certify that this information is true and complete to the best of their ability, and you can add any notes to it. Again, this chronic homelessness form developed by the Bureau of Housing Supports needs to have additional information attached to it whether it's the HMIS record of their stays in emergency shelters, whether it's a letter of verification from an outreach worker stating that this person has been experiencing homelessness, the disability letter, the SSDI letter, but it needs additional documentation attached to it to be considered complete. Any questions?
Christy, I have one. It's Angela Spinney from CCEH.
Hi,
How
Angela.
are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. It's a quick question about that eligibility. When we start doing eligibility screening for a new participant, we fill out all that paperwork, we do the timeline, we get their documentation for disability and all that. Then if it's a month or two has gone by before we found an apartment and actually have a move-in date with a signed lease, at that point, we have to go back and redo the timeline, correct? Because now the dates are off from the year of move-in versus when we verified them as eligible.
So the verifications, you are valid for 120 days.
Okay, so as long as we're within that 120 days, we don't have to redo the timeline.
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank
But
you.
I would recommend for projects that are trying to document chronic homelessness, if that person, say when they're referred to your project and they have experienced 9 months of homelessness, but the time you get them actually housed and you're able to document 3 more months of homelessness and they meet the chronic homelessness definition, that you document that.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. All right. So next we're going to move into disability definitions. According to HUD, any individual who's experiencing homelessness who has a disability means an individual experiencing homelessness as defined in section 103 and is defined in
Share on
section...
your screen, we can't see it.
Oh, really? Thanks, Angie. Hold on. Okay. So the definition for homeless individual with disability is up on the screen. I will share this when I send out the PowerPoint. So typically we're looking for the disability to be long continuing. You still can't see it. Hold on.
No, still not there.
I'm awesome at this. Hold on. How about now?
There you go.
Okay. So the disability definition, they are looking for the disability to be expected to be long continuing or of infinite duration, whether it impedes the individual's ability to live independently. Could it be improved by provisions of more suitable housing conditions? Is it a physical, mental, or emotional impairment, including impairment caused by alcohol or drug abuse, PTSD, or brain injury? Is it a disease of acquired immune deficiency syndrome? And is it defined as a developmental disability? So they're really looking for any household with one or more person who has a disability. Please note that for any household being admitted to a chronic homeless dedicated bed, the adult head of household must have the disability unless there is no adult in the family. And then the minor head of household could be the qualifying member into that household. So again, as I said, oh, I'm on the wrong screen. Hold on a second. You're going to complete the Bureau of Housing Support's chronic homelessness documentation. For any permanent supportive housing project, whether or not the bed is dedicated to those experiencing chronic homelessness, you need to have a disability verification in the participant's file. This can be a Bureau of Housing Support's verification of disability form. Again, it can be written verification from a licensed qualified professional, written verification from Social Security, or a veteran's disability payment. Bureau of Housing Supports has a disability verification form that I will send out with this training to share with all of you that you can send out to providers to have them complete, which meets all of the requirements for HUD.
Christy, that slide said you could use SSI.
It depends on the status of the SSI and what the SSI is being issued for, Ellen. Does that make sense?
I
So-
guess it's say on there what.
I can send out further information in the email about when SSI is actually qualified as a disability verification. It is preferable that you have the actual SSDI information because SSI is not always disability related.
Right.
So if the SSI letter states the disability in there, would that be eligible?
Yes, they frequently do not, though. So typically, we're looking at the SSI. If it's under 65, it may be eligible, but typically we're more looking for the SSDI payment or Veterans Disability Payment verification forms.
Christy, the only, I'm trying, the only problem with the SSI is if there is well, of course, we know they have a disability, but like they could have gone to the doctor like 8 years ago and got a diagnosis, but they've been homeless and they've lost their paperwork. So how are we supposed to work around that?
So if you have someone who's receiving SSI and you're trying to have them be eligible for a project and they saw a doctor more than 8 years ago, I would either recommend reaching out to Social Security Administration to clarify what type of, if they're getting SSI or SSDI, because oftentimes those letters that they receive for their SSI or SSDI award letters do not clarify what type of assistance they're receiving. Or secondly, I would recommend completing the disability verification form, and it may be sending that letter to the doctor that they saw 8 years ago, or having them see a new medical or health professional to get that verification form completed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Lastly, we're going to review Dedicated Plus projects. Dedicated Plus projects began in the 2017 Notice of Funding Available from HUD. Dedicated Plus projects are a renewal project where 100% of the beds are dedicated to serve individuals with disabilities and families in which an adult or child has a disability, including unaccompanied homeless youth, which is determined at intake. The Dedicated Plus definition is a little bit convoluted. There are currently 4 projects in the balance of state who must meet this eligibility. There's 6 different eligibility standards for people entering into the Dedicated Plus projects. The first one is experiencing chronic homelessness, as we discussed earlier. If they were residing in transitional housing, that will be eliminated and they meet the chronic homelessness definition at the time they entered the transitional housing. If they were residing in a place not meant for human habitation, emergency shelter, or safe haven, but they were experiencing chronic homelessness and were previously admitted and enrolled in a permanent housing project in the last year and were unable to maintain a housing placement, or they were residing in a transitional housing funded by a joint TH permanent housing rapid rehousing component project, which we do not have any of in the balance of state, so that is not eligible currently. Or they're residing in a place not meant for human habitation or safe haven or emergency shelter for at least 12 months in the last 3 years, but has not done so on 4 occasions. So it's the attempt to meet the chronic homelessness definition, but they have not been able to meet the 4 different occasions in the last year. And the final one is receiving assistance through the Department of Veterans Affairs and has met one of the above criteria at initial intake into the VA's homelessness system. Next, we're going to briefly review homelessness verification. HUD has established a order of priority for documentation for homelessness verification for any non-chronically homeless dedicated beds or projects or dedicated plus projects. So the slide above shows you the order of preference for HUD. What they're looking for is that you meet this order of preference for homelessness documentation. The preferences begin with initially, if you can get, what they're looking for first is that you document homelessness verification from a third party from the place the applicant is living. So this could be from a police officer who sees a household living in an unauthorized campground. This could be from an outreach worker who meets with a household living on the streets for the last 9 months. Any third party actual documentation of their observation of someone experiencing homelessness. So it's not just that the household told their mental health therapist that they're experiencing homelessness. The third party has to actually observe the household experiencing homelessness and be able to document it. HUD is looking for that verification first and foremost in a participant's file.
Christy, so that
Yep.
would include community case managers, and also we have a couple therapists currently at CLM who are going out into the community to do therapy because we're still under CLM's own guidelines for COVID. So if they physically see that, this would be accounted for them, correct?
Yes, anyone who is a third party and is able to say, I have actually seen them living in a tent behind the supermarket on this date, this date, this date, and I know that they're experiencing homelessness.
Or they've seen them in their car or something like that. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Fair Housing Supports will be issuing a homeless verification form soon and some guidance around third-party documentation and what needs to be captured in that letter. The letter needs to really clearly state, like, if it was a police officer who saw them and tried to offer them assistance, like, what days did they see them? Where did they see them? Were they living in their car in a parking lot without access to basic needs such as like toilets and showers and those things? It needs to be very specific, and it can't just say they came into my agency for an intake and told me they were experiencing homelessness. It has to actually be observation of the actual experience of homelessness by that household, which is the first acceptable verification. The second one is intake worker observations. So if you're not able to have that third party actually observe and detail their observations of someone's living situation and experiencing homelessness, you can have the intake workers' observations noted in their file of their details of a living situation or the notes of their calls to a third party to verify those living situations. So it could be, Angie, I'm going to pick on you. Angie picks up the phone and she attempts to call one of the outreach workers in her agency who are going out to see this person experiencing homelessness in the woods. So she can document her calls to that third party worker if she's unable to obtain that verification from the actual worker who saw them in the woods. And lastly, the final homeless verification order priority is self-certification, where you're able to document certification of the person who's experiencing assistance. So that documentation of those 3 months experiencing homelessness from the actual person, or a written record of the COC subrecipient agency's due diligence to try to get the third-party documentation from other parties who witnessed the homelessness. So we're gonna run through this really, really quickly. So if your permanent supportive housing project or rapid rehousing project is serving people living in places not meant for human habitation, you should be documenting their current living situation. So you should be verifying that a family or individual or youth is living in a place not meant for human habitation, either through a certification form from an outreach worker or an organization. This can even include, so we talked about police officers, mental health agencies. It can observe businesses who witnesses people who were sleeping outside their offices. It can be any third party who has witnessed someone's experience of homelessness. If you are documenting someone who's coming from an emergency shelter, you should be verifying their history of shelter usage. You can either obtain HMIS status, or you can obtain a written signed dated verification from that emergency shelter. Or lastly, you could document a phone conversation with the emergency shelter staff. It's preferable that you have HMIS data, or that you have an actual written letter from the shelter staff. If you are struggling to get that letter from the shelter staff, you can always reach out to Bureau of Housing Supports, specifically to me, to get the HMIS data that you're looking for, if it is shareable, and I can give that information out to you. I'm going to briefly run through this. If your program is serving people coming from transitional housing for homeless persons, a very big note, we do not have any COC projects currently that can accept applicants from transitional housing programs. So I'm going to skip over this one, but the information is there if you need it. If your program accepts people from short-term stays at any institution who previously resided in a place not meant for human habitation or an emergency shelter, you need to verify with institution staff that the participant has been residing at the institution for less than 90 days and obtain proof of literal homelessness prior to entry and upon exit. If your project is serving those who are fleeing domestic violence, according to HUD's definition, you need to verify with a third party if appropriate and does not create an unsafe situation, which means obtaining written documentation from a domestic violence emergency shelter, other domestic violence provider, or other entity with knowledge of the situation. They are allowed to self-certify as necessary, so they are not put in any degree of danger and to ensure the household safety. We also need to document for anyone who is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence their lack of resources or support network in order to obtain other permanent housing that is safe for them. In regards to documenting homelessness, again, we talked about HUD has an order of preference to make sure that homeless verifications are up to date, beginning with the third-party observations are the #1 verification that HUD prefers. All subrecipient agencies are required to have policies about intakes and documenting eligibility at screening and intake for participants, verifying homelessness status and standards for documenting due diligence. So this means if you are unable to obtain verifications upon eligibility and admissions into your project, you're documenting your attempts to obtain that verification, such as I sent out an email to this police officer to request that he document this person's homelessness verification on this date. I followed up with a phone call on this date to obtain the verifications. Anything that you're doing to obtain those verifications for either eligibility for homelessness status or disability needs to be maintained in the participant's file. All right. So we are going to do a quick group exercise and eligibility determination, and then we will take a quick 15-minute break. So let me pull that up for all of you. All right, so I have up on the screen a case scenario about Jacob. And I want each of you to take 10 minutes to read through the case scenario, and then we're going to come back together and review question number 1 and question number 2. It's in regards to disability verification and how to document disability verification. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen, and I will be available for questions and monitoring the chat, but I'm going to give you 10 minutes to look this over, and then we'll come back together.
I am running to Staples because they're completely out of ink across the street now.
Go.
I'll be back.
I know I said 10 minutes, but does anyone need more time?
I'm gonna take that as a no.
Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome.
Okay, so in regards to Jacob, question number 1 is, does Jacob likely meet the conditions to qualify as disabled for HUD definition and the requirements for the COC funded permanent supportive housing?
Yes,
Why?
because they've observed him and he is actively using and he needs to seek services to help him.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'd say no.
Okay, why?
No, but I'm, just because there isn't that documented disability yet. Did they do?
Anybody else? I should have done a poll, but I don't know how to do that.
Well, the question is likely. So
Right.
he likely meets it, and then you try to get the documentation, I would say.
Yep. So in regards to question number 1, he may meet the conditions for qualifying as disabled under the COC program. There's some indication, as you all said, that he may have a disability, such as a substance abuse issue. But there's not enough evidence at this point. And then in regards to question number 2, with Jacob's consent, what should staff do to verify and document he has a disability?
See. Get him in for an intake to see if he qualifies, if he's with him consenting.
I think it should be B.
Yeah.
I think it's B.
I think they should start the process while they also reach out for the documentation.
Right, and they can start even, the housing search. You do have that 45 days, so.
So if there's no instance for self-certification, the staff observations of his disability, sorry, let me start over. Disability must be documented for permanent supportive housing projects by a licensed professional who is qualified to diagnose that disability. So to expedite his movement into permanent housing projects, you can look at getting their SSDI check or payment. So if you can get a copy of their bank record showing the deposit of an SSDI check or veterans payment into their account, that would be allowable. You can also get them in for an intake, as Angie said, to document that disability as soon as possible. My question would be, what would you do if he doesn't agree to going into an assessment or an intake with a local mental health center? Angie, I saw you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having work done in my house, so it's a little loud sometimes. So I would say ask him if he has, like a PCP or anything like that that could possibly, vouch that he does have, whether it's substance use disorder or another disability. You could go that route. Again, like you said, you could go and call Social Security to see if he does have, Social Security, because some of these clients who are homeless and out there in the lovely world that we have, most of them do not have a bank account. So you have to kind of investigate and figure out where they're getting their money from, if they even have those benefits. So that's where I would go. I would find out if they have a PCP that's been working with them.
And I would completely agree with you. If you're able to find out that information within the time frame that's allowable, that would be great to get them
Right,
in.
if they're willing to give you that information too, because as you know, some of these homeless individuals are very distrusting of us. So you have to gain that trust. Example of the client who now has been housed for 2 years, but it took Derek and I 8 months for him to finally break and trust us.
Mhm.
So It took us a while with that case, so it's a matter of them trusting you versus, us being like, we're here to help you, but they don't know that. They think we're just someone else that's gonna take something of theirs and run off,
I would also say it is that matter of trust and rapport that you're building up with your clients, but also if you're at a complete standstill, you can reach out to me at the Bureau of Housing Supports for some creative ideas that we've done in the past with some of our participants in order to get their disability verifications. But if they're absolutely flat out refusing, which is their client choice to obtain the disability verification, there's other COC projects that we can look at getting them entry into when there are openings. Not every COC project requires a disability verification, so we can look at maintaining their status on the prioritization list and getting them into a different COC project. And maybe later on down the line, they might be willing to do the disability verification and they may transfer to a different COC project that can maintain them long-term if need be. But again, there's always that option of a COC project that does not need disability verification as well. So, all right, we're going to look at one other example and then I'm going to do a poll. Hold on one second. Nope. Hit the wrong button. I need a technology secretary, as many of you know this. All right, one more scenario. Hold on, let me share. And I'll give you 5 minutes this time because last time it was too long. So take a look at Mark Mitchell and the scenario, and then we will talk about what homeless category he may fall under and if he is eligible for any permanent supportive housing programs. All right, do we need a couple more minutes or are we good? All right, so we have Mark Mitchell, who is a veteran, has PTSD and struggles with chronic substance abuse. Mark has been living on the street and in shelters for the past 6 years and is presently staying overnight at a local park. The staff of Reaching Out have worked with Mark for a number of months and discovered that his veteran disability payments are not sufficient to allow him to obtain his own housing, and he's in need of ongoing permanent supportive housing. permanent support to, sorry, ongoing support to maintain his housing. They've identified an opening of the COC funded program, which is permanent supportive housing program, that targets veterans and has convinced him to take a look at the program. Mark has agreed with an initial assessment to determine eligibility, but wants someone from reaching out to go with him. Who can tell me what category of homelessness does this individual fall under? Again, category 1 is literal homelessness. Category 2 is at risk. Category 3 is eligible under other federal statutes. And category 4 is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence.
Category 1.
Freeman. Yes, this individual falls under category 1. They are unsheltered homeless. He is a primary nighttime residence that is in a public or private place that is not designated or ordinarily used for sleeping accommodations for human beings. So question number 2, does this person, because they are category 1, are they eligible for permanent supportive housing under a COC funded project?
Yes.
Why?
Because they've been homeless on and off for the past 6 years, and it has been observed by outreach.
Or
And
missing?
he's also has PTSD, and his veteran status for his pension that he gets is not enough for him to support himself on his own without a subsidy.
Yeah, so he has the identified veterans disability payment, which makes him have a disability verification, and he also appears to meet the chronic homelessness status for most permanent supportive housing projects, and he meets the literal 1 category of homelessness verification. So he would potentially be eligible for a COC permanent housing project. So I don't know how to do a poll, but I'm going to bring this up. So I was over ambitious today, as I typically am for those of you who know me. We have probably half of the training left to go, and this training is scheduled to go till noon. So what I would say and what I would suggest is that I'm willing to give you back a half an hour of your day, and we can complete the remainder of the 102 training later this month, if everyone is okay with that, because I don't want to rush it in the next half an hour. I also built in a break for the next 15 minutes before we got into the final parts of this presentation. All right.
Works for me.
Sounds good, but Christy, I'm sure you'll do it, but I just have to say it. Can I have a copy of the recording? I want to set it aside for Susie when she comes back from vacation, so we can go through
Yes.
the material together.
I will share the entire PowerPoint after the next training, but I will share this recording after this training. I just, while I have all of you, and I would also like, if any of you have any feedback about what you really want to see in the second part, we will be reviewing housing search, rental calculations, acceptance into COC programs, housing quality standards, leases, occupancy agreements, and rental calculations and rent reasonableness in the next training, including going over all of those forms and recertification. So if you have anything specific or specific questions you want covered before that next training, please send it to me. I will send out the PowerPoint for the first half of the 102 training after today. And then I will also send out what's going to be covered in the next 102 Part B training, as we're going to call it, prior to that training. And if you have specific questions you want covered during that training, I will send it out. So my question is, I know we have, would a can send out a poll, but I'd rather just do it now. Does the 29th work for everyone in 2 weeks, or are you all booked? You can just put yes, no in the chat. You see lots of yeses. Okay. Thank you. All right. So what I will do is I will send out the agenda for the next training. I will send out the PowerPoint for this part of the training and the recording. And yes, I will include the disability form for HUD Lauren. When I will send out the forms that I talked about today so that you have all that information. If there's anything specific you want covered in the next training, please let me know. I will record the next training as well and have those PowerPoint slides available for all of you. So it seems like most everybody can do the 29th. Lori from Southwestern did bring up a point that we do have HMIS blackout period starting that Friday. I don't know if that impacts anybody else. But if we did an hour and a half training on the 29th, I'm hoping that will work for everybody. If I see a lot of declines, I will look at a different date for the invite. All right. So lastly, I have good news to share with all of you while I have you captivated. HUD announced the FY 2021 Notice of Funding Available COC Competition Awards yesterday, which is really, really exciting. So all of the renewal COC projects were funded. Most of you saw increases in your budgets. Melissa Hatfield, the bureau chief, and the collaborative applicant will be sending out an email later today. I'm also really happy to announce that we got 2 new domestic violence bonus projects through this funding, which is very, very exciting. So we will be sending all the information out, including the funding amounts for the entire awards and information and including those 2 new projects. Those 2 new projects will not start immediately, of course. We have to wait for grant agreements before we can begin them. But I'm super excited. The Bureau of Housing Support's got about $5.5 million to support people experiencing homelessness and to serve the most vulnerable across New Hampshire. And it's really in a large part to all of you who have worked so hard on this projects that you have at your subrecipient agencies and your due diligence to ensuring we're meeting HUD's requirements and applying for that new funding. So I'm super excited, and I have just seen amazing growth in our COC system and our projects in the last couple of years. So please keep up the good work. Part of it is these trainings, and I know it's kind of hard to sit through, but I'm very, very excited. So look for that announcement hopefully later today. So good work. Thanks. Happy Tuesday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Christy. Well done.
Thank you, Christy.
Thanks, Christy. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm not joining the Doug meeting because I have to be there, so. Yeah, and I gotta get my head, and I'll deal with Mike.